Ben Hildebrand, Eric Kirby's stepfather, but how did he really die in Jurassic Park 3? Many people have tried to speculate, theorize, and even come up with their own ideas on how Ben actually died, but the real answer is something far more terrifying than you ever would have thought. As we know, Ben and Eric become marooned on Isla Sorna after the boat they were paragliding on crashes into rocks and they drift through the air towards the island's jungle. At some point following this ordeal, the two finally land on Isla Sorna and were both forced to resort to basic survival skills. During the landing, their parachute became snagged on a tree branch, leaving Ben and Eric hanging. Eric managed to detach from the parachute and fall to the forest floor as Ben records this with a handheld camcorder. And this is where it gets really confusing, because in the camcorder footage, Ben is literally about 10 feet above the ground, but later on we see him actually way up further in the trees, indicating that something else has happened here. There's also another major issue here. Ben is now missing his legs. And we know this because Dr. Alan Grant finds the parachute, and when they pull it away, they discover Ben's skeleton remains falling from the tree branches above, still harnessed by the parachute, and his corpse had no legs, implying he was attacked and killed by something, while Eric, not tied to the tree, managed to escape. And you might also be asking, how did he go from being 10 foot above the ground to now being way up in the trees? Not to mention missing his legs. Now, if we take a look at the shooting script for Jurassic Park 3, this will give us an insight into how Ben was during the landing. They hit several branches and canopies during their fall to Isla Sorna's ground. And as you can see from this extract here, Ben is quite injured when he's actually in the tree. More injured than he's actually letting on. Now, he could have some form of internal bleeding that Eric was never aware of as he was hanging in the trees, and that could have potentially have killed him off. This is near enough confirmed in Jurassic Park Survivor, where Eric goes into details on the fall himself, and this is what he says. "I remember hanging there, Ben telling me everything was going to be alright. Then looking at him and knowing that wasn't true. He'd been injured in the fall, badly injured. He told me it will be alright again, he smiled, and then went quiet. Even though his eyes didn't close, I knew he wasn't with me anymore." Now that extract is quite chilling and sums up kind of what happened to him, but there are several things wrong with this extract and theory. We know they're trying to allude to the fact that Ben died of internal injuries, but that certainly doesn't explain his missing legs, or the fact that he goes from being just above the ground to being now way up in the trees. Many people believed, and still believe to this day, that the pteranodons were the main cause of death for Ben. But there is no real evidence for this at all. Sure, I suppose you could argue that pteranodons could have grabbed his body or himself when he was still alive, pulled him further up into the trees, and that's how he got higher, but there is no real evidence of this. Not to mention, how did he even lose his legs? Now, there are several theories, but I believe I have the definitive answer. Ben comes crashing down through the canopy, receives several internal injuries as he does, lands in the tree, and dies of internal bleeding. Later on, the raptor pack comes along, sees him hanging there, would easily be able to jump up. As we've seen from Jurassic Park 3, they can easily jump up and try and grab him, and in doing so, they grab his legs, but are unable to pull him out of the tree due to the parachute and him being entangled in it. Instead, they take bites at his legs, eventually ripping off his limbs. Now, you might be asking yourself, how does that answer the question that he moves from 10 feet above the ground to now several feet way above in the trees? Now, as you know, Jurassic Park 3 isn't actually known for its continuity because it was actually being written as it was being filmed. So one of the possible answers is he lost his legs, died of blood loss, and then pteranodons came along and tried to pick at his corpse, grabbing it and pulling it further up into the trees and canopy. And that right there is the only logical explanation, unless he was killed before he died of internal injuries. Now let me explain. So let's say he didn't die of his internal injuries but was actually killed by blood loss. It is quite plausible that when he was being attacked by the raptors, or any other carnivore for that matter, he was still alive, awoken from his slumber due to the adrenaline, pulled himself higher into the trees, and used the cords of the parachute to stop the blood loss, which is kind of how we see him in the trees wrapped in all this cord. He could have done that himself. And if we actually look at the body, there's very little to say that it was attacked by a carnivore, as the body and torso itself are very much intact apart from their missing legs. Obviously, he's been picked clean of his flesh, which would definitely happen in a hot and jungle environment due to the bugs and everything else. Not to mention smaller carnivorous and scavenger animals, much like the compies. Smaller pteranodons, juvenile pteranodons could also come along, picked at the corpse, potentially even tried to move it. All this could have happened after the death of Ben. Now let's not forget that Ben was actually found 8 weeks later, so decomposition is definitely a factor here. Although we do need to come to a definitive answer as to what actually happened to Ben, and here it is. Ben's boat crashes into the rocks. Ben unclips himself and Eric from the boat, causing the parasol to drift onto the island and them along with it. Ben became trapped in a tree and manages to release Eric. Now, the film on the camera showed that Ben had been alive for at least some time after becoming stuck. The shooting script tells us that he was heavily injured during his fall and when stuck in the trees could have played a factor in his death, but maybe not all of it. Because as we know, he was found further up in the tree and missing his limbs. And that could be down to the fact that he was in proximity of that raptor nest, and the nest seems to suggest that he was killed and eaten by them. But not directly, they would have eaten his legs and then he would have pulled himself up further into the tree, hence why we see him further up in the tree later on. And that is where he stays until he later succumbs to his internal injuries and blood loss. Because let's not forget, if he did decompose and his legs fell off, then we would see him on the ground when the cast walk by, or at least an indication that they were lying there. Now that would be the actual main cause, but as to what happened to his body after the death would be purely speculation. Although taking your now stepson to a dinosaur infested island is a bad idea, Ben's heart was in the right place and just wanted a good time for him and his stepson. As he says, a trip to remember. Well, I think we can all agree that Eric is going to remember this for the rest of his life. But we do have another question. What actually happened to the original boat which was carrying Ben and Eric? Well, I have the answer to that as well. Go check this video out here. I'd like to thank my Patreons and YouTube members. Thanks guys for supporting. I couldn't do it without your support. And I'd like to thank you for watching all the way until the end. Thank you very much. I'm Shadows and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers now. Bye bye.